Have you ever wondered what happens to the soul in the very first moments after death? Have you ever felt, deep inside, that there must be something between God's judgment and heaven's perfection? Have you ever asked yourself what your soul still carries that heaven cannot receive? These are the questions Saint Faustina Kowalska was faced with when God allowed her to witness what truly happens in purgatory. And what she saw was nothing like the stories people tell. It was far more beautiful, far more serious, and far more real. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe if you want more spiritual stories that reveal what the saints actually saw. Because today, we follow Saint Faustina into a place almost no one sees clearly, a place where mercy does not punish, where suffering does not condemn, and where God's love purifies the soul until it shines like it was meant to shine. Faustina didn't enter purgatory through imagination or fear or superstition. As she wrote in her diary, she was taken there by an inner light, the kind that fills the soul with a reverence too deep for human language. She found herself standing before a vast realm, not hell, not heaven, but something in between, a place filled with a warm, dim glow, as if dawn were rising beneath a veil. The souls there did not scream as in damnation. They did not curse as in despair. They longed. That was their suffering. A longing so intense that it burned away every imperfection left on the soul. Faustina wrote that purgatory felt like the abyss of God's mercy, not a prison, not a courtroom, not a chamber of torture, but a hospital, a spiritual hospital where every wound of the soul is healed no matter how deep. Yet she also saw the truth people often forget. Even in mercy, purification can be painful, not because God inflicts pain, but because letting go of sin hurts the soul that clung to it. Faustina watched souls purified by longing, longing to see God, longing to love perfectly, longing to finally be free from every shadow that had kept them from Him. She described the place as filled with a gentle fire, not destructive but refining, like gold being purified in a furnace. It was beautiful, it was solemn, it was holy. And as Faustina stood at the threshold of this realm, God revealed to her the first rule of purgatory. Nothing impure can enter heaven, but no soul who desires God is lost. This was the beginning of what she would learn. Before Saint Faustina could take even a single step deeper into that mysterious realm, the atmosphere around her shifted. It was not a shift of fear nor a threat, but something far more profound, a clarity as if the soul itself were being invited to understand what earthly eyes cannot see. Faustina often wrote that purgatory is not a place of God's anger, but a place of God's truth. And truth, when finally unveiled, becomes both the soul's sorrow and its healing. She saw that every soul in purgatory had already been judged worthy of heaven. Their salvation was secure. Their destiny was certain. But there was something they all shared, a recognition of how imperfectly they had loved God on earth. This recognition, this sudden, unfiltered awareness, was the beginning of their purification. Faustina watched as one soul, radiant yet incomplete, lifted its gaze toward a faint light above. It wasn't flames that purified the soul. It was the longing for that light, a longing so fierce it felt like burning. Not burning from the outside, but from the inside, the burning ache of love that had finally awakened, but could not yet reach its fulfillment. In her diary, Faustina wrote, "The greatest suffering of the souls in purgatory is their longing for God." And now she understood why. In life, many of these souls had loved God sincerely, but with distractions, with attachments, with pride, with fear. They had prayed, but half-heartedly, loved, but imperfectly, forgiven, but not fully, trusted, but only when it was easy. Now in purgatory, all of those hidden weaknesses stood in the light of eternity, and the soul, finally able to see itself clearly, longed to be clean of them. Faustina saw this longing take shape like a gentle fire encircling each soul, a fire that burned nothing external but illuminated everything internal. She watched the souls bow their heads, not in despair, but in surrender, a surrender so total that it would be impossible on earth. Here there were no excuses, no illusions, no spiritual laziness, only truth and the soul's desire to become worthy of the God it now loved without limit. Then Faustina realized something extraordinary. Every soul in purgatory is happier than the happiest soul on earth, because they know, absolutely know, that nothing can separate them from God ever again. Their suffering is holy, their longing is holy, their purification is holy. And Faustina stood in reverent silence before this mystery of mercy. As Saint Faustina was allowed to go deeper into the realm, something remarkable became clear to her. Purgatory was not a single place. It was more like a vast spiritual landscape with different states of purification, each one shaped by the soul's need. She saw levels, not in the earthly sense, but in the sense of how ready a soul was to behold God. Some souls were surrounded by a brighter glow. Their purification was lighter, gentler, almost like the last polishing of a jewel already shining. Others appeared in a dimmer region, as though wrapped in a soft mist. Their longing was more intense, their purification deeper. But none of them despaired. Faustina could feel it. Every soul in purgatory loves God more fiercely than any soul on earth. Their desire has been awakened to its fullest, and now that desire draws them upward like a flame rising naturally. Yet that same longing, piercing, overwhelming, irresistible, is also the source of their pain. Not because God denies them his presence, but because they now understand what their hearts were created for and can no longer bear being separated from him for even a moment. Faustina noticed that these souls did not resent their purification. They welcomed it. They wanted it as desperately as a wounded person wants healing. In her diary she wrote, "I saw souls in purgatory. They desire purification. They desire to be immersed in the fire of God's love." She now understood why. On earth a soul clings to its imperfections. In purgatory it begs to be rid of them. She then noticed something even more profound. The souls could see one another, but they did not speak. Not because communication was forbidden, but because all of them were turned toward the same light, toward God, and nothing else mattered. No jealousy, no comparison, no anger, no bitterness, just pure longing. Faustina realized that purgatory heals not only sins, but also the injuries caused by sin, the wounded ego, the prideful thoughts, the selfish desires, the reluctance to forgive, the attachments to comfort, the stubbornness of the heart. Every part of the soul that resisted holiness on earth is softened here until love becomes easy. Then Faustina was shown something extraordinary. Purgatory is full of gratitude. The souls thank God for not giving up on them. They thank him for mercy. They thank him for purification. They even thank him for the suffering that prepares them for heaven. Faustina felt humbled. She realized that if souls on earth understood this place, they would run toward holiness with urgency. They would repent faster, forgive sooner, detach willingly, pray with more heart. Because here, in purgatory, every soul sees with perfect clarity that the only thing that ever mattered was love. As Saint Faustina moved deeper into the mystery before her, something shifted in the atmosphere, not visually but emotionally. She felt an overwhelming sensitivity, a spiritual awareness, unlike anything experienced on earth. Here in purgatory, nothing was hidden. Every movement of the soul was transparent, naked before the light of God. Faustina saw that this transparency was not humiliating, it was liberating. On earth, souls hide behind distractions, work, noise, pride, entertainment, fear. They avoid facing themselves. They avoid facing God. They avoid facing their interior wounds. But in purgatory, the soul can no longer hide. It sees its entire life at once. Every moment of love, every moment of selfishness, every opportunity embraced, every opportunity refused. And above all, it sees how gently God had tried to draw it closer at every step. Faustina watched as one soul, luminous but trembling, lifted its gaze toward the soft, distant radiance above. As it looked upward, a wave of truth washed over it, a truth not condemning but clarifying. This soul saw every person it had refused to forgive, every grudge it carried, every moment of pride, every act of impatience, every time it defended itself instead of choosing humility. None of this came as accusation. It came as invitation. The soul whispered, not with its mouth, but with its being, "Lord, burn away all that is not love." And the purification deepened. Faustina realized something staggering. The soul itself chooses the purification. It desires it more than we on earth desire comfort, success, or pleasure. It wants to be perfect, so it can love God completely. The suffering was not forced. It was voluntary. It was the soul's cooperation with divine mercy. Then Faustina saw something she had written in her diary come alive before her eyes. There are souls which delay their entrance into heaven because they refuse to be fully conformed to the will of God. Here, conformity did not mean losing identity. It meant becoming the person God intended them to be from the moment of their creation. That transformation was beautiful, but it was not painless. Faustina saw another soul kneeling in the glow of Purgatory's gentle fire. Around it were faint shadows, remnants of earthly attachments. As each shadow faded, the soul became brighter, lighter, freer. Each release was painful because the soul had once clung to these things so tightly. But the moment each attachment dissolved, the soul glowed with a joy that made the temporary suffering seem insignificant. Faustina stood in awe. This was purification, not punishment, not wrath, but love that refuses to leave a soul incomplete. And heaven does not accept half-healed hearts. Saint Faustina soon noticed something astonishing about purgatory, something she would later write with reverence and trembling. The souls there were not alone. They were surrounded, watched over, and assisted by angels, whose presence filled the entire realm with a quiet, steady peace. Not comfort, not relief, but peace, the kind that comes from knowing the journey is guided. The angels did not intervene in the purification, nor did they shorten it by force, but they stood as guardians of hope, reminding the souls, without words, that God had never abandoned them, not even for a moment. Faustina saw one angel standing beside a soul whose purification was especially deep. The angel's face radiated compassion, but not pity. Angels do not pity the soul's suffering, because they see the glory that awaits after it. Their gaze was fixed on the transformation happening within the soul, every layer of pride dissolving, every hidden wound opening, every unhealed sorrow surfacing, every forgotten sin being acknowledged and released. The angel illuminated the soul's process with a soft brilliance, as though saying, "Do not fear this fire. It is the last thing that will ever hurt you." Faustina wrote in her diary that angels carry the soul's prayers to God and God's mercy to souls. Now she saw this truth before her. She observed one soul surrounded by the faint glow of penance, reaching upward with trembling longing. The angel beside it bowed with deep reverence, not to the soul itself, but to the mercy God was pouring into it. Then Faustina felt something else stirring in the air, a movement she recognized immediately, the prayers of the living. They came like rays of light, gently breaking through the dimness of the realm. Some rays were bright and warm, filled with love, sacrifice, or deep sincerity. Others were faint, a quick prayer, a distracted whisper, a forgotten offering, but still they reached the souls. Faustina wrote that no prayer for the dead ever goes unheard. Now she saw the reason. Even the smallest prayer becomes a drop of relief for a soul longing for God. She saw a soul lift its head slightly as a soft beam of prayer light touched it. It wasn't dramatic, but the soul's longing eased for a moment of comfort in its holy suffering. Faustina realized that this brief relief felt like a drink of cool water in a desert. Then she remembered the words Jesus had once spoken to her. "Your prayers bring them relief." And now she understood how real that relief was. Purgatory was not isolated. It was surrounded by the love of heaven and supported by the prayers of earth. The souls in purgatory were living the final chapter of mercy, and no prayer offered by the living was ever wasted. As Saint Faustina continued to observe, a deeper truth emerged, one that pierced her heart with both sorrow and hope. She realized that not all souls entered purgatory with the same wounds. Each soul carried its own history, its own frailties, its own unhealed places, and purgatory addressed each one personally with a precision that could only come from divine love. Faustina saw a soul whose purification came almost entirely from regret. Not despair, not self-hatred, but a holy regret rooted in love. This soul had believed in God, but had lived with spiritual indifference. It had done good, yes, but without depth. It had prayed, but without heart. It had confessed, but without real transformation. Now, in purgatory, the soul saw how much love it could have given, and did not. This realization formed the fire that purified it. Another soul suffered from the lingering burden of pride. On earth it had been religious but rigid, quick to judge, slow to forgive. Its words had been sharp, its opinions immovable, its heart closed. Here, the soul slowly learned humility, not through humiliation but through truth. Every moment of purification stripped away the illusion it once clung to. Pride melted like frost before sunrise. Faustina then saw a soul wounded by unforgiveness. This soul had carried a grudge so deeply that it had poisoned its final years on earth. It had refused to forgive someone who had hurt it. Now, in the light of God, that unforgiveness burned, but not as punishment. It burned as healing, like a splinter being removed. Painful, yes, but necessary. These different sufferings did not divide the souls, they unified them, because each soul knew it suffered only to love better. Faustina was struck by another reality. In purgatory, the soul no longer blames others. Every trace of resentment disappears, every excuse dissolves. The soul sees only itself and God, and the immense love that has been waiting for it. Then came the revelation that humbled Faustina more than anything. Some souls suffer not because of grave sins, but because of small acts of love they failed to give. A kind word withheld, a prayer abandoned, a moment of impatience, a refusal to apologize, a missed opportunity to comfort someone in pain. These small things, ignored on earth, became the soul's purification here. But none of it was tragic. Faustina saw that the souls embraced this purification with profound gratitude, knowing that every tear of longing was washing away a barrier between themselves and God. This was the justice of mercy, a justice that heals, restores, and prepares the soul for glory. As Saint Faustina went further, she began to understand something even more mysterious. Purgatory is shaped not only by the soul's wounds, but also by the love others failed to give it. This revelation stunned her. She saw a soul surrounded by a soft, dim glow, its purification gentler than others, yet deeply sorrowful. Faustina understood why. This soul had endured neglect, loneliness, and emotional wounds during its earthly life. Those wounds had not been the soul's fault, but they had still left marks, marks that needed healing before heaven. Purgatory was not punishing this soul. It was restoring what others had broken. The soul did not resent the pain. It did not accuse those who had hurt it. Instead, it surrendered completely to the healing light that filled the space. Faustina realized something profound. Purgatory is not only for sins committed, but also for love never received. Because heaven requires a heart that is whole, not perfect in merit, but perfect in love. Another soul showed her a different truth, how purgatory heals not only the wounds inflicted by others, but also the wounds the soul inflicted upon itself. This soul had lived a life of fear of failure, fear of God's judgment, fear of not being good enough. These fears had caused it to hide from love, to avoid intimacy with God, to cling to spiritual minimalism. Now in purgatory, the soul confronted those fears in the light of truth, not with panic but with relief, because for the first time it saw that fear had never come from God. Faustina watched the soul slowly open like a flower that had spent its life in shade and was now seeing sunlight for the very first time. Its healing was beautiful, painful, yes, but beautiful. Then Faustina noticed something remarkable. Some souls suffered more from sorrow than from fire. It wasn't the sorrow of regret or loss. It was the sorrow of seeing clearly how deeply God had loved them every moment of their lives, and how often they had ignored, postponed, or resisted that love. This sorrow wasn't condemnation. It was purification through revelation. The soul finally understood the truth. God loved me far more than I ever allowed myself to believe. Faustina saw tears of light fall from these souls, tears that glowed like liquid gold. These tears were not bitter. They were the last drops of imperfection leaving the soul forever. And then she realized the greatest paradox of purgatory. The souls suffer because they love God, and rejoice because He loves them more. This was no prison. It was the final embrace before heaven. As Saint Faustina continued observing the holy suffering of purgatory, she was shown another secret, one that startled her with its truth and tenderness. She saw that even the smallest act of love from earth becomes a great force in purgatory, shaping the very environment in which souls are purified. She witnessed a soul surrounded by a faint but beautiful radiance, like a halo made of soft light. At first, she didn't understand why this particular soul glowed differently. Then she saw it. Tiny streams of light descending from earth, prayers, sacrifices, acts of kindness offered on the soul's behalf. Some lights were strong, steady beams from loved ones who prayed daily. Others were small flickers, a quick prayer from a stranger, a whispered intention, a candle lit without much thought. But every single one reached the soul. Faustina realized something astounding. The living have more power over the dead than they imagine. These acts of love did not eliminate the soul's purification, but they shortened it, softened it, and strengthened the soul's longing for God. She understood why Jesus had told her repeatedly in the diary, bring me souls who suffer in purgatory." This was not poetic language, it was literal. The prayers of the living, rosaries, masses, acts of forgiveness, sacrifices, small offerings, and even distracted imperfect prayers all acted like water poured onto a parched soul. Then Faustina was shown a startling contrast. She saw another soul, dimmer, enveloped in a sorrow deeper than the others. This soul had lived a life of faith, but died without anyone to pray for it, not out of malice, but simply because no one remembered. Its purification was not harsher, but lonelier, slower, more silent. There was no stream of light breaking through the dimness. Yet even this soul was not abandoned. The angels stood near it, and God's mercy surrounded it like an unbreakable wall. But Faustina understood the message. The forgotten souls suffer longer, not because God forgets them, but because the world does. She felt this truth burn in her heart. She saw how souls lifted their heads slightly when prayers reached them, how their longing softened, how their purification accelerated, even if only by a little. Even a single Hail Mary could tip the balance of their suffering. Faustina felt overwhelmed. Here was a place where love became fire, where mercy became healing, and where every prayer became a bridge between two worlds. This was why the Church prays for the dead. This was why saints like Faustina begged the faithful not to forget them. Because in purgatory, even the smallest act of love echoes like thunder. Saint Faustina was then shown a part of purgatory, unlike any she had seen before. A place of deepest purification, where the longing for God was so intense it felt almost unbearable. Not because God was distant, but because His presence was so near that the soul could feel Him, yet not touch Him. This was the final stage, the threshold of heaven. Faustina saw souls who appeared almost fully radiant, like embers ready to ignite into pure flame. Their imperfections were nearly gone, their wounds nearly healed, their attachments nearly burned away. Yet one last step remained, the complete surrender of the will. Faustina understood. Even the holiest souls may reach death with subtle self-will, a desire to control, a hidden fear, a tendency to cling to personal plans, a reluctance to trust God completely. Here, those last remnants dissolved. One soul knelt with indescribable intensity, radiating both sorrow and beauty. It whispered with its whole being, "Lord, take everything, I want nothing but you." Those words were not spoken in despair, but in a purification so deep it transformed the soul instantly. Faustina saw the soul lifted by a sudden rush of light, as if heaven itself inhaled and drew the soul upward. This was the moment of completion. The soul's fire turned to illumination, its longing turned to triumph, its suffering turned to joy. Faustina wrote that at this stage, the soul burns with the pure flame of love. Now she understood exactly what that meant. Then Faustina was given a vision of something even more profound. The instant a soul enters heaven. It did not resemble a doorway or a tunnel. It was like a veil being pulled away. One moment the soul was in purgatory. The next, it was lost in the ocean of God. There was no transition, no hesitation, no fear. Only an explosion of joy so overwhelming that Faustina felt her heart tremble under the weight of witnessing it. She described it as a happiness that cannot be compared to anything on earth. And that instant, that precise moment, was the reason all the suffering had been worth it. Faustina saw angels rejoice, heaven open like a great flame of beauty, and the soul disappear into light. Not disappear in the sense of being lost, but in the sense of finally becoming what it was created to be. This was the destiny of every soul in purgatory. No matter how long the purification lasted, no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how painful the longing, every soul here would reach glory, every single one. The certainty of heaven filled the place with hope that no suffering could extinguish. Saint Faustina then received the final and most sobering revelation about purgatory. Not about the souls who were already there, but about those still living on earth, whose choices would decide whether they entered this realm of mercy or bypassed it entirely. She felt a weight in her spirit, the same weight she had felt when Jesus once told her, "Souls perish in spite of my bitter passion. I am giving them every last drop of my mercy." Now she understood that purgatory was one of those drops, a place where mercy completes what earth left unfinished. Faustina saw that most souls did not reject God outright. They simply lived without urgency, postponing conversion, postponing forgiveness, postponing surrender, postponing love. They assumed there would be time later, but later never came. And so purgatory became the place where their delayed transformation finally unfolded. Then Faustina was shown a painful truth. Many souls could have spent far less time in purgatory if they had loved more deeply on earth. The souls who forgave quickly, who acted with humility, who accepted suffering with trust, who prayed with sincerity, who made small sacrifices out of love for God. These souls entered purgatory like travelers at dawn, needing only a brief final cleansing. But the souls who clung to grudges, who lived for comfort, who postponed repentance, who refused to forgive, who lived religiously but not lovingly, these souls required deeper purification, not because God was harsher with them, but because their hearts were slower to open. Faustina understood that purgatory was not about balancing scales. It was about making the soul capable of heaven, capable of the overwhelming intensity of God's love. And then came the final revelation. Purgatory is not inevitable. A soul can begin its purification on earth. Every act of humility, every sincere repentance, every hidden sacrifice, every moment of true love. These cleanse the soul now, reducing or even eliminating the need for purgatory later. Faustina was stunned. Heaven was not only a reward after death, it was a path walked or ignored every day. Then the vision faded, the light dimmed, the voices of longing quieted. And Faustina found herself once again in her small cell, kneeling, trembling, overwhelmed. She wept, not out of fear, but out of gratitude for God's mercy. She had seen the truth. Purgatory is the triumph of mercy, the place where God refuses to let a soul remain anything less than holy. And the souls there, even in longing, even in suffering, were safer, happier, and more loved than they had ever been on earth. For they were on the threshold of glory, and nothing in creation could keep them from reaching it. There were no demons there, no tormentors, only God's love applied in a way the soul could finally receive without resistance. Then Faustina saw something even more surprising. Every soul there was happy to be purified, not comfortable but deeply grateful, because they understood that the suffering of purgatory was not destruction. It was preparation, a final shaping of the soul until it could stand before God with no fear, no stain, no shadow. And in that moment Faustina realized, purgatory is the hospital of God's mercy.